This is definitely interactive because once I get out of these couple slides, since I know all you are right by a computer, you're going to be able to just kind of do these exercises right with me right at the same time. So hopefully you'll do that. I don't mind an interruption, whether you put it in the chat or want to come off mute and stop me from talking, I'm fine with that as well. So, all right. So we already know the title. We've talked about that. We already know about me. So a little bit. You see the little guy over top of my shoulder. That's the icon or the avatar I use a lot on social media. He also seems to kind of give me bad advice sometimes. So, sometimes good advice.
Pretty sharp looking guy.
Thanks. So as mentioned, I'm with Expert Analytics. We're out of Dallas, Texas, a small consulting company specializing in everything around data and, of course, the Power BI platform and the overall Power Platform. But what you really want to come here to talk about is DAX.do. So what is it, first off? Well, DAX.do is a sandbox for practicing DAX queries. And the keyword, the reason I read that is the keyword in that sentence is the word queries. Most of the time when we think about DAX, we think about measures, right? And the tools are kind of generating the queries for us, like Power BI generates queries. But the more you know how to write those queries or read those queries, the better off you're going to be able to handle things like debugging performance, generating queries for paginated reports, how to come up with better calculated tables. And the other thing that I found, right, you see a lot of queries in learning examples, especially from the SQLBI guys in their books. You're right. You could download the Power BI files and everything, but the more you understand how to read the queries, especially like when you're watching Alberto or Marco work directly in DAX Studio and you see them typing, something up there, the more you understand the query, I think the better off you're going to be working with DAX. So, like I said, it is a sandbox. It does not connect to your own data. It is curated data that the SQLBI guys put together, and we'll see what that data is here in just a little bit. But that's one of the big advantages to it. When you're messing around with it and you're writing the DAX, is that the data model behind the scenes is a good data model. For me, when I'm messing around with something, I want to learn a new DAX function or take on some challenge. It also minimizes my distractions. If I do it inside Power BI, I tend to get distracted and go around to playing with different things, and then all of a sudden I lost track of what I was trying to do. So I use this as a sandbox to learn new functions, and we'll see how that's really going to be helpful with what they integrated in to the whole platform. Okay, so what I'm going to try to walk you through today is how a query like this one that I got from the performance analyzer in desktop, right? So this is a visual on my left-hand side. On the right-hand side, when I got the query and I copied the query, this is what was produced. I don't know about you guys, but when I first got into this years ago and I brought this up and I started looking at it, I mean, it was really foreign to me. But as I got, deeper and deeper into debugging things, looking at performance, keep reading what was going on, and again, reading the different websites, I started to understand it some more. So we're going to go through this and build this type of query out using DAX.do. So like I said, it was just a couple slides. So let's go. All right. So now this is.
Along? We all following along or what?
We all good?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to do this in a private browsing window, and I'll point out a couple different things because the cookies won't get set. But if you do it in a regular window, you know, you won't have, there's a couple things that are going to get blocked out because of it. Not a big deal. So in your browser, you just simply type DAX.do. And this is what's going to come up the very first time. And this is the reason I do this in private, because I want this video to come up. I'm going to go ahead and pause it. But you'll get Marco there has a video explaining what DAX.do is, going through the interface, a lot of the type of things that I'm going to go through. So if you don't get it from me well enough, or you need a reminder, or you want to just hear it with a better Italian accent, because obviously I don't have one, you could listen to him. And it's a very short video. And then, you know, once you're kind of done with it, you could collapse it down. It's asking me, I'm going to tell it to allow cookies. So that's interesting. In private, usually it doesn't ask me that, but maybe something changed in Edge. One of the things to point out is I do like my tabs, and I'm going to have a lot of different tabs open by the end of this, to be vertical rather than across the top. So this is a function of Edge configuration there, not part of DAX.do. If you do collapse this down, the next time you come in, or remember that, you hit the chevron and get the information to come back up, or you could hit the X here. You can see it you know, looks like a pretty standard tool, a bunch of panes inside the window, a toolbar up top. A lot of things are not highlighted right now, and things will come up as we enter our DAX. If you notice a bug, you can report a bug here. If you like to dark mode or light mode, by default, you guys might have had yours come up in light mode. It somehow remembered dark mode for me. And then if there's other options for how you want to have your DAX formatted, because we'll see up here that the format button will come enabled, and you could change how you want some of that to be, and it'll remember all of this. So a couple quick options. So always remember to format your DAX, because only good DAX is formatted DAX. All right. One of the main things we need to understand while working with DAX.do is what are the databases that they have within this sandbox. So they have their version of the Contoso database, and they also have another one called DAX.guide. And you'll see down this side is listing out all the different tables. And you could expand them out and see the columns, or at least, you know, most of the columns. I'm going to go back to Contoso. And if we look at currency, you see we just see our currency and our currency code. You could also show hidden metrics, which now you see the currency key shows up. And on this one, it tells us there's a relationship. So it says it has a relationship. So now we're starting to understand our model. We know we have currency. We know have a relationship. I'm going to get rid of this advertising down here. And when I click on currency key, more information about it comes up down at this bottom window. Can you guys see this okay, or do I need to make it bigger?
I see it.
Okay.
I see it okay. And for those that don't know, if you hold the control button and use the mouse scroll wheel, you can actually zoom in into the screen without having to do anything more. See, if you do the control, that does your whole the DAX.do, but us ourselves can actually use the screen and scoot, zoom in and out. Anyway, fun Teams trick.
That's nice. All right, so so you can see I got the currency key highlighted. Tells us a minimum value, maximum value, the number of distinct values, what the data type is, and here's the relationship. It's got a relationship to the sales table off of currency key, many to one. So it gives us all that great information. But I don't know about you, but for myself, I don't like to read and understand all my relationships that way. So you'll see there's another button here for view diagram. And when we click that, it's going to open up another browser tab, and it shows us the diagram, right? Just like you would see in desktop. So now we could see from date, we have 3 relationships to date, and we could see what they're all going to. We have the one relationship for currency, for customer, and product. So we understand our model a whole lot more. We look down here, see if there's any. So we could expand and collapse it. I'm going to move this up a little bit. So now on sales, right, we know that's going to be a fact table, and they actually designate that for us, right? You see they have this as a little yellow, and it has fact table on it, where product is blue and has dimension on it. So now we know how they're expecting us to work with this model. We could look through here, and we have the icons that shows us what our measures, again, the relationships, what these icons here tell us what the data types are of everything. So again, really got to understand your model in order to know how to work with it. The nice thing about this is if you could leave that tab open or even make it another window if you kind of side by side. And if you switch between the data, the models that they have, this will synchronize and switch with it. This always puts colors for me just a little bit off, so we move it there, and then it will remember that going into it. So again, if you're going to look into using these data sets, you see this synchronized, and now we change to that. All right, well, that's enough to kind of just get us started. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit here. I'm going to pull this back up. Let's start with this. Let me bring this window over. Right, so now remember what we want to do is try to see what we have to do to reproduce this query. I'm going to ignore the order by at the very bottom, but I'm going to work this from the bottom up. And so the first thing it has is this evaluate and one of the variables from up top. So, and that's going to go to top end.
Question. Can you post the code in the chat so that we could kind of follow through and do it on our side?
Yeah, I got a whole link here I'm going to send out in just a second.
Thank you.
That actually gives you all the solutions. I don't have this code exactly, but we're going to produce something like this because the model I took this from wasn't exactly the Contoso model. But I'll give you some links to something because once I introduce another feature here. Okay. So we know we have to use from the bottom up, we have to use evaluate because evaluate is what actually runs a DAX query. So we're going to start typing, and you see they have autocomplete turned on. It's close to what Microsoft's IntelliSense is. So it's going to be, you just start typing and it'll show you what's out there. Okay, so for those of you that have worked with a brand new language, whenever you're learning a language, what's the first thing that you write besides trying to write any big query?
Hello world.
Hello world, exactly. Thank you. If I had candy, I'd give it to you through the... So we're going to start by creating a single row table, and using the curly brackets, we could produce a table within the evaluate or anywhere within DAX. So we're going to say hello DAX, close our string, close our table, and you see it highlights for us. You see now our toolbar, right? A lot more things became active to copy, paste, clear. We could change things. We could comment something out, uncomment it. And of course, format, because again, no DAX code is good DAX code unless it's formatted. Always keep that in mind. So once we have that, we can now run this. And we get our results down in the bottom part here. So we have our hello DAX. Very nice. So like I said, one of the other things that you could do, because I will get ready to put that link out for that question that came out, is once you have a DAX query, and you want to share it with anybody, this sharing function is available here. So you click on that and it says, do you want to save your code and share it? You say yes. And it's going to give you two links. It's going to give you a public link and a private link. The private link is what you want to save in case you ever want to come back in here and edit it again. The public link is what you could give out to everybody else. I'm going to go ahead and give this one. And then after that in the chat, let me see if I could find the chat real quick. Teams chat, sorry about that. I should have had this part pulled up to begin with. So there's the hello DAX that we just did. For all of the examples that I have, we'll see how many we get through tonight, depending on how fast or slow. I got, here's all the ones that I saved, and it's got a couple other reference links, but these are the exercises that I'll be going through tonight. If I was going to, save this, so I wanted to edit it, I'd make sure I'd keep that link and I wouldn't have shared it with you all. But that doesn't matter here. Okay, so again, thinking back to this little story. So we know what we could do underneath evaluate because we said hello world. So looking at what this variable is doing, it's doing a top end of something. Well, I don't know top end too well. So let me just start seeing how I could learn it on my own. So without producing the define or the variable yet, I'm going to type in top n and let it complete. And you see what DAX.do helps you with quite a bit. It gives you what all the parameters are in order, shows you what's repeating, all of these brackets and everything. But this is pretty good. It's expecting me to give an n value, but I'm not sure I know what n value is for yet. So another thing you could do is click on that keyword. And I'm going to expand this side out. And this is the part that I love for learning DAX inside DAX.do. It's fully integrated with DAX.guide. And so when you come through this side, you could read a lot more of the documentation about how top end works. And since they link to their articles and the DAX.guide document itself, you could just click on it from here. If you haven't used DAX.guide before, I strongly recommend that you do that. I like it better than the Microsoft documentation. When you have cookies allowed, you're not in a private area, a private browser like I am, you also get a video of Alberto explaining the function to you. Actually, now that I allowed cookies, it shows up. Last time I did this, that didn't even give me that option. So I think that's great. So now we could read through here and we know that it's going to return the given number of top rows according to the specified expression. Our end value is actually the number of rows to return. So, that's what I needed to type in is what's the number of rows to return. I need a table, the order by expression, which goes into a row context. Again, we could read through all of this. The return type is a table. So that means since it's returning a table, I could use it in a query. So a query is always going to return a table versus a measure returns a scalar value, right? Excuse me. So you always want to make sure, that's why when we did hello world, if I didn't wrap that in those curly brackets to make it a single row, single column table, it would have given us an error. This is one of the best parts here. You come down and you hit on the example. So they give us this example here and you click try it. And guess what? When you hit try it, it takes you into DAX.do. And it's going to do this DAX code against the DAX.guide, the DAX guide database in DAX.do. If we move this part back up, we see we got a result set with the product names and the top 3. So now we're already learning really quickly how to utilize top N. So if we break this down a little bit more, our 3 is this N value. The table that we're working from is going to be this complete table, which is add columns, and it's going to get values. And again, if you don't know these functions, if you haven't used them before, it's going to get the values of product name, and it add columns is going to add a column to the table that's specified in parameter 1, right? So you add the table and then the name that it's going to add and what that expression is. So it's adding @sales amount, which the SQLBI guys have a very specific naming standard for DAX with these @ parameters or these @ signs, and they have an article that I would recommend searching on their site and reading, and they explain why they use certain naming standards. And it really does make sense. I try to use it as much as I can, as much as I remember it. Can't always say I do, but I probably should reread it a few times. So it's going to add a column to this table named @sales amount, and it's going to use our sales amount measure, which we should be able to find right here in our sales table. This is coming back out to the top N. So if we look back to that, this is our order by expression and what our order is, descending or ascending. And then all of the evaluates, as we saw in the original query, you could tell it to order by something, right? So this case, it's order by the new column that was added into this table, the @sales amount, and it's ordering that descending. And here's our result. Okay, so I know a little bit more about top N, but what if I just wanted to kind of goof around with this and change it to see, well, how does it work if I make this sort the other way? So I'm going to make it ascending. Anybody have a guess of what's going to be returned by just making that one change?
The bottom 3.
The bottom 3? It's a good guess. That's what I would hope for.
Oh, I know the answer now.
Yeah, you saw this before. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I think that was Belinda. I don't have.
Yes, it was. You know my voice well.
Anybody else have a guess of what's going to happen here?
The bottom 3 of each product, but then sort of descending
Okay.
by sales amount.
Well, let's run it and find out. I got 282 rows.
Oh, I just
Right.
failed.
They're all blanks. So that's one of these things about top N is it doesn't always respect. 3 is kind of like a soft limit sometimes, or the number that you provide to it, because it returns ties. And so in this case, the bottom ones were blanks, so they are all ties, so it's returning all these blanks. Well, that's not really what I want, right? So I want to get rid of these blanks. So again, now I want to think about how I could do that, how I could learn from it before I get back to that other statement. So if there's anybody wants to take a guess before I start typing, a way to do that. Any thoughts?
Filters.
Filters. Yeah. So we know in DAX quite a bit that we have a way to do filters. And one of the most common ways of doing that is the filter function. So again, I just bring that up. I could see what I need to do, so that I first have to give it a table and then what my filter expression is. So I want my table to be my add columns. And I know I get myself in a lock here because I first want to make sure I properly end my top N. There's something, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. Oh, I know what yeah, okay. Because this needs to be there, there. So I put my other parenthesis in the wrong place. So I want to filter that column. Get rid of this because that's going to cause me an error. So I got my filter, where that's ending at. This is the table I'm going to filter. And what I want to be able to do, and I'm actually going to cheat. I'm going to copy this from what I gave to you guys instead of you watching me type and maybe mistype it. Okay, so I still have my ascending down here, and I needed to pull in a few more functions that we have to learn. Is blank, we'll check a value, and we're simply going to check the value of the column that we added, @ sales amount, to see if it is blank. But I don't want to keep the blanks. I want to keep the non-blanks. So I'm going to reverse that with the not function, which is going to change false to true and true to false. So now in my filter, I have my table, which is, again, the add columns that we've been working with, my filter expression, which is this entire part. So now if we just go ahead and run that, so now we see we actually get the bottom three. The sort's just a little bit different because this order by is still descending, so I could simply change that. Run it again. And this is probably what I want to return. So, hey, great, we're learning a whole lot more. One of the reasons I did want to copy this over because is remember what I was saying was formatting your code, right? So if I format this code, formats out, no problem. One of the things you'll notice is if you have a syntax error, and I'm going to introduce one here by taking that comma away, and I do format, you get this ugly red box. It's not extremely helpful. It's basically telling you you have some type of syntax error. It's usually going to be you didn't close your parentheses correctly or you don't have your commas correctly. And you could kind of start figuring some of that stuff out. But now if I format it again, everything is great. But what if I really wanted to go, well, I know I got this working, but I wanted to really understand it some more. So another thing you could do is, let's say I want to learn step by step what's happening here. You can, within one query, have multiple evaluate statements. And I'm going to first have this evaluate of product name and see what comes out. Then the table that gets produced around that with the add columns. And then finally, the top three that we're filtering and everything else, right? So this would be a way, let me format this, run it, and we'll see how this comes up. To me, this is a nice way, and you could do this in DAX Studio too, to help you kind of debug what's going on, and see the different steps within your DAX. So you can see we have 2,517 products, and that's going to be, all the unique product names in this product table, product name column. We navigate through this by our tab order here. So our second query, which is our add columns, and we're adding sales amount to it. So now we could see this. And as we page through it, if we would have done this prior to trying just changing that ascending, we would have seen the blanks and maybe we would have thought about it a little bit more, maybe not, right? But again, now that we know a little bit more, it helps us understand what's going on. And then, of course, our result from the top three. I do stuff like this all the time. If I'm working with my own model, or again, just trying to learn different functions, is I'll have all these multiple evaluates and keep paging through these result sets and to try to really understand what was going on. So I'm going to kind of pause there to see if everybody's kind of caught up, if they're able to stick with this, or
any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, hi Kevin. My name is Sujin. This is my first time joining. And one of my questions is, you know how in SQL statement, every statement will have a select, a from, a where, and a group by and order by. What are the essentials for DAX that every query will have?
So every query will have the evaluate. That's an excellent question. It'll have an evaluate, and the expression down below must return a table. So again, that's why we did the hello world where we made it. And those are the very basic elements. You don't have to have an order by, and the select is whatever is returned from your DAX query itself, right? In this case, you don't really kind of come out and say select. I think there is some functions where you could select different columns from a table, but you don't always have to use them. It's what you're building out within your whole set of functions from DAX, right? That'll determine what's returned. So in this case, again, we started with the values of just product name, and then we added a column to it. And so now we have a in-memory table that has 2 columns to it, product name and sales amount. And then that's why top N only returns those 2 columns, because that table was produced before that. But as long as you got a valid table after your evaluate, that's really all that's needed. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I do have another question.
Sure.
So just going back to SQL, even though we write select from where, but the query pulls from the where first, and then your from statement, and then the order, it doesn't go from select from where. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What is the order here that the DAX is looking at first, even though you're writing evaluate and top N and stuff? What is the order that it's reading?
That's a good question, and this is probably a good question to also plug Phil Seamark's book on DAX. I don't remember the name of it. Belinda, you might remember it, or somebody else. You could put it in the chat. But his book is excellent for translating from SQL into DAX, because he actually writes it from that aspect, that lens. But I won't be able to do it as much justice as him. But basically, DAX works inside out, right? So the first thing it's going to do, and this is why I pulled this out to another evaluate statement, is it's going to produce this table of values product name that we put in our return table 1. Then going to the next outer function is going to do this add columns, which built that table with the 2 columns on it that we saw in 2. Then we didn't build a specific evaluate for this, but we could have. Then it's going to work with this filter. And then last, it's going to work with what the top N sees. So it works inside out, for the most part.
Got it. Thank you.
I was laughing because I was looking for his Amazon page, because he has 2, beginning and pro, and Bass beat me to it. He already had it in
But that excellent questions. I'm glad you kind of brought that up because that helped drive the point through why it's nice to do these multiple evaluates to see what's happening from the furthest inside on your DAX queries to the outside. All right, well, let's go back to what our query looks like over here. Let me pull this back over. Okay, so we have a better understanding of what's happening with this top end, and we'll come back and rebuild that a little bit later, but we can't build this exactly because it's first taken in a variable for this summarized columns. So let's figure out what summarized columns does. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to clear out my what I just had there. I'm going to start with my evaluate again. Get my autocomplete happening. Click on summarize columns and I could see again what I need to provide. So I need to first give it a grouping column name. Then I could give it filter tables and name of a column to be added, similar to what add columns just did, and then the expression to add that column. It returns a table, and so we know we could use it down in this part of it. So then maybe what I ought to do is see if I can keep this in a way that I could flip back and forth. All right, so if we look over here, we see we're working with summarized columns. We're going to work with the calendar month, the calendar month number. And the reason that Power BI put this into the query is because I set my model to be sorted by the month number. So it needs to include it in the query in order to do that sort at another time. It has a filter table, so we'll peek a little bit at what this function is. And this is a treat as. We'll cover that here in a little bit as well. But this first part of treat as should look familiar to you because we use the curly brackets in our hello world or hello DAX. So this is a single row table with the value of 2018 in it. And this is for our calendar year. So let's go through and try to write this just a little bit more. We're going to ignore the treat as at first and come back to it. All right, so I'm going to go back to our Contoso model. And we want to work with date. And we have month. See what this all looked like, right? So we would give it month number, ignore the filtering, but then we have to give it some name. And you notice I didn't name mine as nicely as what the other guys did. And this is going to be the measure. Okay. So we're going to say month number. And again, keep your commas in place. That's always what gets me. And we're going to give it an expression. And I'm going to use, instead of, I think I had quantity in that one, I'm just going to go ahead and stick with our total sales. The measure, where was that? Sales amount is the measure. And since I thought it was going to be total sales, I'll fix this here in a little bit. You can drag and drop things over. And I'm just going to call it sales. Close it out. Let's hope I don't get any big red. And it came out nicely. All right, so I could run this. We look at our results. We got some pretty big numbers here, which is okay. And this happened to sort all in the correct order. I could put an order by to say order by month number here to make sure that it's going to sort correctly. But I'm not sure that I expect it. Like if I'm just looking at a month, that I would have expected all of this, these large values. So that's when we kind of get back into this here is this filter table. So here it's filtering, in this case, for the year 2018. Well, let's go ahead and build it the same way that they have it So we're going to start now introducing our define section. So inside our define, we could define variables, measures, right? Again, all of this you could do within DAX Studio as well. So it's just kind of the structure of the whole query. You have a define section to define things unique to the queries, to your query, and then the evaluate. You could have multiple evaluates. I'm pretty sure you could only have one define. I've never actually tried it with multiple, but it seems every time I've looked at it, define was only at one time, right? Because you're defining measures, variables, things that you want to use here. All right, so we're going to define a variable, and I'm going to call it underscore underscore filter date. And I'm going to say equals, that was using treat as, and again, our prompting tells us we need to give it an expression, the column name. We could read here a little bit more of what that's doing. The expression that generates a set of columns to be remapped, and the column name or column names is what we're remapping it to. So what I want to filter on is under date of, I want to filter out my year. So I'm going to expand calendar and look at calendar year. And this is what's nice again about trying to learn what's inside their data model. You can see they did their years a little bit different than how I did my years. Their min value is a string CY 2005, max value CY 2011. Okay, well, let's pick a year and hope that that year is there. So I'm going to come in here, give it a string. We know what this looks like because we did it before. I think 2007 is a something that actually has data. And I wanted to treat that single row table as my calendar year. Close that down. And then just like what we saw before, we could come in here. We put our, we have our grouping columns, right? So our group by columns, which is repeatable. Filter tables, which is repeatable. So we're going to add our filter table after that. Then what we're adding on to it. So now I would expect these values to come down. What do we got to do? Format. Make it look nice. And we see we get much lower values. So this is just for the year 2007. Well, so that's great. So now I understand, again, working from the bottom up, I understand top end, I understand summarized columns, I understand treat as. So let's kind of just put it all together as how they did it with the variables.
One quick question, Kevin, that
Sure.
came in.
Yeah.
What is the difference between define and evaluate?
I call them sections. The define section is just like what it says. It's going to be an area that you lay out things that you want to use or reuse throughout your query.
Kind of like the filters, right? It's how I.
Yeah, like in this case, this is a variable and it's a filter. This becomes a table, right? And it becomes a table because of the way treat as works. It treats the columns as a table, and it can be used within other filtering setup. All filtering in DAX, even if you code something like column A equals a value, in the back end it turns that into a table filter. So that another thing, and we'll do this here in another exercise, is I could define measures, and this is what's really good about trying to learn either with DAX.do or even if you're trying to code your own measures against your model. You could define them up here first and use them in a query to sit there and test them. I just did that with one the other day where it wasn't coming up exactly correctly. So I took a copy of my measure, put it in my define section, called it 2, put a number onto it, built out the query, and I put the current measure plus the new measure on it so I could see what was going to be changed, because some values were being returned correctly, some weren't. And so I wanted to check that everything was happening, and the ones that were correct were still correct, and the ones that I fixed with my code was fixed. Then the evaluate itself is the query that's going to be run. And so this is what's going to give you the result set. And this is why we're able to put multiple evaluates in there. For those of you that are kind of like coming from SQL stored procedures, I think of this define section as like the declares that you would have. And then underneath each evaluate would be kind of like each table, how a stored procedure could return multiple tables. That's what each evaluate section would do. Does that help? Whoever asked the question?
Aziz?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. All right. So as we saw within that other code, what I could do is take my statement here and actually make this a variable. And I'm going to call it just some cols. And I could have this work exactly the same if I just put this underneath my evaluate. I'm always happy when that formats correctly. Right? And see, so this works exactly the same. I don't have, as long as I have something that's returning a table underneath evaluate, it's going that this variable can run right underneath it. And then the last part of that, if we flip back again.
And that was a comment Rachel just made. Couldn't you have variable inside the evaluate?
I believe you can. Let's go to a new tab. That's an interesting question.
Rachel, don't you write DAX? Is this like a question you know the answer to?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I just, no, I sort of, I don't use define very much, but I put variables right inside. So, and I know you're trying to show what is spit out, at least I missed the first part, but it seems like you're trying to show what was spit out and you're re-rendering it, right, which is great. But I think evaluate, I mean, the bar could go inside the evaluate in that statement that you just did.
I think I have to use a return.
Yeah, you do. So maybe that's, I've been so interested to hear how you use define, because I always see it and I would think, you know, I should really learn how to use it, but I never use it.
Well, again, I learn it because you noticed here what Power BI generates. It puts all of its queries up in the define section, and in its final evaluate is just its last query that.
You mean it puts all its variables in the define?
Right. But each variable is in itself a query, and they just return each one, and they chain them together, right? So, which is really kind of nice, because sometimes if I go through and get this from Performance Analyzer and I'm trying to understand why it's not working the way I do, and I'm debugging it in DAX Studio, then you just come over here and you go, well, instead of this primary windowed variable, what did DS Core produce? Or if you have complex queries and it's got a whole lot more, what did it all produce? So it is a nice way of breaking that down.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could definitely do that. You could put it in the return part.
Okay, thanks. I was just wondering.
Sure.
I'm going to commit to learning define.
Well, and I never did it that other way before. I have seen it, but that was new for me as well. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
So now we're going to say, just to kind of finish out that, I'm going to call it return.
So is double underscore a naming convention?
It's something that I just kind of, it's what Power BI tends to do, and I tend to do it as well, just to make sure that I'm not hitting reserved words or anything. Because if you hit a reserved word, you'll get an error.
Okay, so you're not using it to kind of represent a dynamic table or anything.
I think it's a habit I've just fallen into on my own. I'd have to go back and reread the SQLBI article, and I keep meaning to go find it and add it to that list that I gave y'all. I don't think they use it a whole bunch, but just because of working with ones from Power BI, I think I've fallen into it. So it's my quirk, I guess.
No, I'm starting to implement some of those things for defining calculated fields. So I'm just curious if there's a standard.
Yeah, I know for sure the @ sign is SQLBI standards. And they talk about when to use it and when to use other things. So let's see, now I got to do my order by expression, which I believe is going to be @ sales. And that should give me everything. If I change my evaluate, we'll do 2 evaluates again. Change this one to, and you notice for your variables, right, it does keep that in context, so it does help you with autocomplete. Format, both of them ran. Obviously, there's no difference. If I change this to top 2, run it again, the first one I get to 12 rows, this one I expect I'd only get to 2. And it did the top 2 by sales.
I just put in 2 links for you, Kevin. One is to the article on naming conventions for variables and one for temporary columns. So I think one of those must be the one you're referring to.
Yeah, probably. Thank you, Belinda. And I probably need to save that. Like I said, I need to put it into my list. I've referred to it, I think, every time I've given this presentation. So I appreciate that. All right. So we've been successful, right? We built this out. We built it, and it looks pretty much like this. We've learned a lot from it. So let's learn something new. Let's learn something different. One of the challenges that I think is within DAX quite a bit is the idea of transition, right? Or context transition. For those of you following along, in the link that I provided, where'd it go? It's called Add Columns versus Summarize Columns. So I'm going to start a new tab. I'm going to bring that shared query up. And let's walk through this one a little bit. So again, talking about our define section, I don't think you could create a measure inside the evaluate part, right? You could do those variables and return the variable, but I think measure has to be up in the define part. So this is my own measure that I'm creating here, which is simply going to do a sum of the net price. And I guess I'm using the DAX.guide model on this one. And I want to compare 2 different things. I have a function that I'm using here that we used earlier, add columns. So we know this is going to be a table. And to that table, I'm going to add 3 columns. I'm going to do where I had called it inline sales. So just sum of sales net price. I'm going to do measure, and you guys already see this answer, so I can't ask my question. Here of my sales, which I defined up here. And I have another one that is calculate of the same thing I have in the inline, and just this simple expression.
So I have a
So actually, I'm not on this answer since I'm looking at tab 2, right? But so this isn't the answer for this statement here. Before I reveal what's up in tab 1, what do y'all think's going to happen here using add columns and with these 3 different ways of writing this same expression? Will I get the correct values? Will any of them be incorrect?
And the
Okay.
Jeopardy music is playing. Anybody?
Are you getting the same value for each row?
Do you think in the colors or in the color trends?
Yeah, the inline sales will be that always the same. It will be the sum of the sales table. No filtering.
Good. Okay, so no filtering. So this one you think is going to be the same for every color group?
That's my guess.
Okay. And then in that case, will these 2 values, will the measure be different than this first one?
My sales defined on top based on the context.
Right. I mean, yeah. Yeah, because here, I mean, this is the exact same sum, but you're dead on to it. Let's go ahead and look at it because you're exactly there, right?
So 1 down, 1 wrong.
Actually, let me go ahead and run this because that didn't. Oh, okay. I know why it looks this way. Because remember, we got color groups and there's 2 columns in color groups. So we're specifying a table here. And that's what these first 2 columns are. And you said inline sales was going to be the same all the way through, which it is. The reason being, within add columns, the context transition to the row to a filter, taking this row and making it a filter context, doesn't happen in this case. And if you're ever adding like a calculated column and you have that type of problem in your data model where you just see the same value all the way through, we could see you could fix it by wrapping that in a calculate. Or when you use a measure, even though this measure's syntax is exactly the same, there's an implicit calculate wrapped around it. And so that's how it works for add columns. If we page down a little bit, you noticed earlier, and you'll notice Power BI used this function a lot, is summarize columns. So that's result 2. Even though we wrote our expressions exactly the same way, summarize columns did it correctly even when you just put this here. And if you want to go over, read the documentation on this, it's going to, and especially their introduction and everything, they talk a lot about how it does properly handle this, the changing of this row context to a filter context so that this works correctly. And that's why you see it used quite a bit. One of the things, and I just saw somebody tweet about this today, one of the people I follow on Twitter quite a bit. He goes, I really wish I could use summarize columns in a measure, but if you put this up in the measure to produce like an inline table in your measure, you'll get an error because you can't use it within a measure. So that's why you end up using a lot of things like add columns. And when you're doing that within a measure, you got to make sure you understand that you get the context transition, right? The row to a filter context to translate in there. And again, reading these articles, coming over here, right? The best way to kind of learn all of these type of things. But these were my examples.
And you said, Kevin, that where we put that measure in under define, that was the one that had the implicit measure or implied?
Yes, any measure that I put here, even if I put it from the that's defined in the model itself, this add columns here is going to have an implicit calculate wrapped around it. Whenever you're using a measure, it does start with that there is a calculate to do that transition. And it is just kind of implicit there for you. That's why this using the measure and this using the expression written all the way out, that's why they work exactly the same.
Gotcha.
So I do want to point out one more, maybe two more. We've got just a little bit more time. So when I was putting all this together, what I really learned, because I use what we tend to call the Bible, right? The Definitive Guide to DAX. And if you're looking at that first link that I sent over, this is called DAX Bible Figure 17. I want to say it's on page like 133 or something like that inside the book. But you could go ahead and download. There's that book comes with a whole bunch of PBIX files and everything that you could go through and do. But I like to sometimes just kind of get in and do them on my own and type them all in. Well, they're using, I guess here I'm using DAX.guide again. Thought it would have been the Contoso model. They're going to use either the DAX.guide or the Contoso model in all of their examples. And the SQLBI guys will point out to you quite a bit if they're not using that or they're using a different version of it. In those next three examples, the book talks about one way of getting sales and why these numbers aren't really correct and probably not what you want, because it's doing this all sales. And so it's removing all filtering on the product and date when it's producing this percentage. And if I go to the second query that was on that, here, they have all sales again, but then they reapply what the values are for the date calendar. And now you see we get different values. If you remember, the number before was like a 0.3 something. Now we're getting a 0.91. And the book talks about how this is probably, really what you want, because you only want to really remove the product filter, leave the entire year so that you're doing it's the percent of sales for this product within this year. And then the book itself goes into the last part of the example later in that chapter. And I know I'm going through these things a little bit quick. I know we've gone for quite a while here. So here it introduces this nice function called all selected. And we could use all selected and read through what this is going to do for us. All selected has always been a little confusing for me. But again, we run this, we get the same answers, the 0.91. And then in one of the last times I did this presentation, we said, there's a newer function now that even makes more sense to us, or to me, is remove filters. So if I do this, oops, it added that. Okay, see, that's why we format. And we get the same value. Reading this code to me makes a little bit more sense, right? And there's so many functions within DAX. It's why, I encourage to kind of learn the ones that are out there or what you like to commonly use, because even just writing, the same formula that we just looked at 3 different ways, this one makes a whole lot more sense to me, and I think is easier to debug as a measure. And, it's just again, a whole lot better. But the point I wanted to make is if you wanted to learn more about DAX and everything, their book uses these same models. Come up here, write them. Their videos and their articles do. I have another example in there and a link to the article, which is the all except versus all. And I'm going to share one more with you guys. I'm actually going to bring up this YouTube video first and pause it. It went back. Okay. So if you watch this video, where'd it go? I saw it. Thought I had this to the right point.
Because of the name of that video, I have to say it. DAX is easy, but it's not simple. No, DAX is simple, but it's not easy.
Okay, but in this video somewhere, there it is. He posts a challenge. And so he comes out with, if you understand what's going on here, is when you look at this matrix being returned in Power BI, when you sum up these numbers, does it sum up to 11,000 something? Quick answer is no, right? That's 8,000 plus 3,000 plus another 2,000. This number should be higher, but we're not getting this final total to be correct. And I think he shows what, yeah. So again, this is he's got a measure called customers 1 and a measure called customer 2. And in this video, he kind of says, well, this is very simple, but until you know how to handle this, and he kind of put a challenge out, and he doesn't give the answer in this video. So I said, I bet you I could go to DAX.do and where did I go? And come up with the same numbers so I could look at it. So I wrote the same thing using our starting from the bottom, we have our summarized columns. There was another function for roll up add is subtotal. This is what gets us our final total. And you see I produced a customer 1 and a customer 2. I'm getting those same, 7,999, those same numbers. And the total here was at 11,041. And here it's the 14,228, which would be the correct total. And my point again is using DAX.do because it's coming from the SQLBI guys. It took, I went out here and just very quickly was able to write the query and then start messing around with the solution until I came up with my customer count 2. And you could see I went through, because again, you can't use summarized columns. I produce and add columns where I get the values of what we're doing for the date year, add a customer count to it, wrap it in a calculate, using these values name, and I count the rows. So I'm counting the number of customers, which is going to give me my unique customer count, which is also why up here it doesn't work correctly, because if I use, like even a distinct count or something like that, this is roughly the same as a distinct count. It's just faster. But then here, I'm able to build this table and then produce a result that I summarize the values actually in that table. So now I get my visual totals to work correctly. Again, watch his video talking about why DAX is simple. It's just function after function working from the inside out, but it's not easy, right? You got to understand context, when context transition is happening, and all of those type of things. This helps you, again, see the functions, read the documentation, and have the same data set that they're working with to help you learn it. So that's it. That's all the exercises that I have. There is one more exercise. It's very complex, and the last time I tried to get into it, I couldn't remember it. So the article that it came from, as well as the exercise, it's another YouTube video, and it was that all except versus all something. It's not totally coming up. Versus all. You could work that on your own if you want.
Or maybe next time when you come back.
Or maybe next time I could try to remember it again. I got a new mission that we talked about earlier, right? So that might be my next one.
Well, do you want to talk about that new mission? Should I,
Well, so yeah, I mean, since I kind of teased it, we were talking when we got on to test everything. I was with the Milwaukee user group and Mike Carlo last night. And after their user group, we always do a networking session, and then Mike throws a challenge out at us, and we stay on way too late messing around with things. And look at his channel, because he's been putting out this new DAX generator, and he's been putting videos out almost every day about this nice DAX generator that he has and the templates on it. I'm going to get involved with him on that project. But the one that we threw out yesterday is there's this tool that was released, this external tool called Pbi Tools. Let me see if I can find the link to it again. What it does is it will break down your desktop file for all the visuals, the model, everything, into the individual JSON files or whatever files that are used within the PBIX. It's just a zip file. So you could put it into a source code like GitHub, and you do that, you commit it one time, you make a change to it, you say you have another branch or whatever, and you put it into that again, you could see all the changes that occurred within that PBIX file. The other nice thing about that tool is, based upon what it broke down, and this is not going to be supported by Microsoft, but he's got a way that it could compile all of those objects back into a PBIX file. So in theory,
I think I found the link. Is this the right one? Do you want me to share my screen real quick?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and stop.
Tell me if this is it. Come on, computer. You got this. It's the Power BI.tips, the Power BI version control. Is this it? See it?
No, that's an older one. Hang on. I put this, I should probably still have it in my history.
Sorry.
Is it a GitHub link you sent me?
Yeah. Do you still have that GitHub link from earlier?
Yeah, I can find it.
It looks like.
Hang on 1 second.
Well, while you find that, I do want everybody to kind of give you a round of applause, Kevin, because you've been just so fantastic walking us through these exercises. I know everybody's definitely got some great practice from today. So thank you. If you all can come off of you, like virtual hand clap.
Excellent job, Kevin. Excellent.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Linda.